The founders didn't write the Constitution and the Bill of Rights with all this bravado and confidence. They wrote those documents in fear. They had come, or their families had, from places where people they knew were hung for speaking up for their rights.
Reading the Constitution, there were moments where I really felt the presence of, the fragility and the beauty that was in that original dream of this country being founded in this way, and that incredible hope that went into those documents, and I almost felt around me the protection that those documents give me and my children, very personally. And then I felt them threatened.
America and our friends will meet this threat with every method at our disposal.
FBI, police, open up!
A new report says the president and his advisors are still making anti-terrorism policy on the fly.
Police in Washington, D.C. have put in place an army of surveillance cameras.
There was a request from the White House as to the possibility of replacing all the United States attorneys.
We don't torture people. Let me say that again to you. We don't torture people.
Preventing mass terror will be the responsibilities of presidents far into the future.
So tonight I'm going to talk to you about some very disturbing warning signs that we have to pay attention to and rise up to confront. I wrote this book in a kind of desperate heat and haste last year because of an emergency I saw that we were facing. I have this friend. She and I often talk about news events together. And we would talk about the Bush administration and things that were happening, and she kept saying, they did this in Germany. They did this in Germany. And at first, really, I have to tell you, I thought that this was crazy talk, so extreme and so out there, right? And I really dismissed it. And she didn't drop it. She kept saying they did this in Germany. Finally, she sat me down and she put a stack of books in front of me and she pretty much said, read. And I started to read. And as I read, literally my hair stood on end because sound bites and images and phrases were leaping off the pages and were current in the discourse around us. Little echoes from things like Homeland, the Department of Homeland Security. It used to be called domestic security, right? Homeland, Heimat, is a word that became current in National Socialist discourse in about 1931-32. The National Socialists pioneered the practice of unloading the war dead off of trains in the darkness of night so people wouldn't know the extent of the war dead. The media couldn't take pictures. This administration has also unloaded the war dead from Iraq off the planes in the middle of the night, a departure from practice. Blackwater, there was a paramilitary organization called Schwarze Wasser. And I realized from my reading that intently, strategically, systematically, a small group of people set out to undermine the Constitution, opening the door for the horror to come. And so what became so clear to me from my reading is that Germany in those years wouldn't have looked so different from today. I mean, we, tend to think, oh, Nazi Germany, it's like a Leni Riefenstahl film. But in fact, Germany in 1930, 31, 32 had gay rights organizations and human rights organizations and feminist organizations. It had celebrities. It had all kinds of newspapers, all kinds of debate, all kinds of dissent. It was a modern state.
I didn't stop with Germany. I started to read about Stalin's Russia and Mussolini's Italy. East Germany in the 50s. Czechoslovakia in the 60s. Pinochet's coup in Chile in '73, and the Chinese crackdown on the democracy protesters at the end of the '80s. The same things recur again and again and again. Little subversions of people's rights, little constitutional changes.
And I saw that the great dictators learned from one another what was essentially a blueprint for closing down an open society. And then it became clear to me that this blueprint is simple. It consists of 10 steps, 10 clear steps. And then what became so chillingly clear to me is that these 10 steps are in place in the United States today.
Fear is the most devastating of all the threats we can have in a democracy. The language of fear will cause ordinary, decent people to do things that's not in their character.
The first thing is to invoke a terrifying internal and external threat. And sometimes it's a real threat.
After 9/11, the Bush administration used a terrible crime against our nation to launch what it called a, quote, war on terror. And Bush team raised Americans' fear level as high as possible.
We will discover and destroy sleeper cells.
Government says because the 19 hijackers got into the country legally, investigators want to know if more terrorists have slipped in the same way.
Right after 9/11, the government created the Department of Homeland Security. And one of the first things it did was literally to create a way to manipulate the levels of our fear.
This is not uncommon. I wouldn't be so sure that the war on terror is real, but is also a hyped threat, right? Yellow, orange, red. Who does this? Who's really fighting terrorism? Does Israel do this? You know, they really have terrorists. And they don't say, it's an orange day, you know? Oops, it's red. You know, they're out there quietly trying to find these guys and prevent these attacks, right? And they take pride in not frightening the citizens, in having daily life go on without fear. Let me remind you of how did the National Socialists come to power?
In Berlin in 1933, the German parliamentary building, the Reichstag, was set on fire. Many historians say this was a staged attack, but it was a terrible shock to people's sense of security. The National Socialists seized on this to pass laws to subvert the German Constitution.
So they said, you're not patriotic unless you pass Clause 2 and later the Enabling Acts. It means the state can open your mail. It means the state can listen to your phone calls. It means that you as Parliament give up much of your authority to the leader. And so that legal process prepared the way for everything that followed.
We see now in our own country legal maneuvers that undercut our civil liberties. By October 2001, the White House drove the USA Patriot Act through Congress. The Patriot Act is over 300 pages long. It weighed as much as a baby. It was printed at 3 in the morning, and they had to vote on it by 11 a.m. The Patriot Act gave the government access to wiretapping you, electronically surveilling you, researching your medical records, looking at your bank records, looking at your credit card statements, even looking at the books you checked out of the library, all without you ever having done anything wrong, and all without a warrant.
Today we take an essential step in defeating terrorism while protecting the constitutional rights of all Americans.
Congress passed a new law called the Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism Act of 2001. The Patriot Act. Sure is the axis of evil for bad acronyms.
The Patriot Act really opened the door for what followed. The administration used the cover of fighting terrorism to greatly expand intrusive federal law enforcement powers.
Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated.
They scared us by invoking the greatest threats of all, the weapons of mass destruction and a false nuclear threat.